Joining me now in the studio to talk more about this case and the charges is legal expert Paul DerOhannesian. Thank you so much for being with me.
Good to see you, Liz.
I think we have to establish this is actually two cases, U.S. Attorney and SEC, civil, criminal. Why would they do it that way?
That's very typical in insider trading cases. First of all, the SEC is looking for civil recovery. It has a lesser burden of proof, and it can go after financial resources and assets perhaps that the criminal couldn't. It's a safety net upon which to work. It's also a two-front war against an accused person.
Does one of those entities have an easier time in terms of burden of proof? They do.
The SEC has an easier burden of proof.
Okay. So they also said at the press conference earlier today that there had already been a settlement with the fiance's mother, I believe, and also the fiancée herself. And so why would they do that? I mean, and then U.S. Attorney Berman was asked that question, and he was like, you know, it's a different case, and I can't speak to why they would, et cetera.
Tactical decisions. They may feel that the case is not enhanced by bringing in people who may have lesser responsibility or culpability. They also may want to use those individuals as witnesses. They can force them to testify if they don't have criminal exposure or civil exposure.
The congressman has been defiant. Interestingly, he can be reelected even if he's found guilty. It has happened before, though he's already been stripped of his position on the Committee Energy, I think it's Energy, by Paul Ryan. He could be censured by the members of his own conference. There was also the stock regulation that was passed by now late Louise Slaughter. She pushed very hard for that, and so there are things that could happen internally. However, he says he didn't do anything wrong because he didn't actually trade any stock. So what does that mean?
He doesn't have to be guilty of insider trading. The fact that he provided information that somebody benefited from, someone close to him, for example, a family member, this is the case of a family member. That's the type of relationship that courts have found to be a significant gift of value, services, or benefit to someone close to that individual that would satisfy the requirement. I think that's a misconception that individuals have, the fact that they themselves did not benefit directly. If it's someone close to them, that's enough to trigger the statute.
In terms of the burden of proof, I mean, there are emails here, there are phone records here. The U.S. Attorney mentioned that after that alarming email about the failed drug test on this MS drug that the entire future of this company hinged on effectively. When he got that email, the congressman was at a picnic, a congressional picnic, and he tried to call his son 7 times in 5 minutes, didn't connect to the last one. Is that very damning in your opinion?
It's circumstantial evidence, but sometimes circumstantial evidence is even more damning than direct evidence. For example, direct evidence, someone saying, I saw him or heard him do something, maybe there's a motivation of that individual. When you have documentary evidence or a timeline, 2 people walk into a room, 1 comes out dead, who did it? It's very compelling sometimes, circumstantial evidence. I think it is a compelling piece of evidence.
So based on what you've seen in this case, do you think it's strong?
It's a strong indictment, but many indictments are strong. And we've seen many times strong indictments don't always play out the same way in court. You don't know enough about some of the individuals. But I'd point out something else here. There's a charge of false statements against several individuals, including Chris Collins.
Right.
Remember Martha Stewart? She was suspected of insider trading. They couldn't prove that, so they just had the false statement case.
Right.
This is an additional area of liability for him because regardless of whether he may have some defenses on the insider trading, the false statement may be more difficult for him to defend against. The problem he's got is many fronts. Number one, the civil, as you pointed out, SEC, the criminal, and congressional investigation.
Right, House ethics too, yeah.
All these are fronts upon which to fight a war. And then within the criminal, he's got 2 fronts also, insider trading and false statements.
Okay, so I do want to talk briefly about the timing of this. The U.S. Attorney was asked about the timing, and he seemed, and this is my interpretation, kind of poo-pooed it. He said, you know, well, the election's months away. And not really. I mean, November certainly is, you know, months from now, but people are paying attention. This has been going on for well over a year now. It's not that people don't know, and Chris Collins has seen his political star rise because of his close relationship with the president. Though my understanding is it's very unusual for prosecutors to indict a sitting member of Congress in an election year.
Remember Senator Ted Stevens? He was indicted months before his re-election campaign. His decision was to take that case to trial quickly because he thought he would be acquitted. He was convicted, but soon after, the case was thrown out because of prosecutorial misconduct. It does happen. Prosecutors have done it before to elected officials. They've done it to New York State elected officials, indicted them in their election year. I don't think it is that unusual. And while sometimes that statement is made that we don't want to influence the political process, I think if you look at Nassau County, for example, they had an individual there, a supervisor of a town. He was indicted weeks before his son was running for state.
Ditto, yep.
And guess what? He was acquitted at trial recently.
Yeah.
But the damage is done, unfortunately, in some of these cases.
But is there a higher sensitivity as a result of the former FBI director Comey and the Hillary Clinton email fracas that we saw? Ex post facto, now we know that probably there was a significant impact on his release of information, his probe, and the outcome of the 2016 election.
It seems like there should be, but how can we know for sure? Is there really heightened sensitivity? You look at this case, until we have more time, more perspective, we're not privy to the internal deliberations of what led to this. It's a concern, though, that you do see these indictments in election years, and you wonder, why wasn't it done before? Why wasn't it done
It's hard, though, to point a political finger because this is a Trump appointee. This is not Preet Bharara, which certainly, of course, is the gentleman who preceded Mr. Berman and also, of course, was fired by Trump after Trump said allegedly that he would not fire Preet Bharara. It was all very high profile. I mean, it would have been easier had Preet Bharara been the guy, but he was not. And so it's a little bit more difficult, don't you think, to say, well, Berman's got it in for Collins.
Yeah, but the political definition, I think that's may not be a strict R and D type of political. It could be an internal division. It could be political in the sense of someone believing will get more attention. You just don't know the motivations. I think the question is out there, but as we're finding out right now and discussing this, it's a hard question to answer. But it's an important one, and we learned that with the Clinton email investigation. These events can have consequences.
So tell me now, you bring up the Stevens case and that he really wanted to expedite the trial. He thought that would be politically beneficial to him. The attorneys, who both happen to be named Jonathan, who are representing Mr. Collins, are saying, you know, he's going to be vindicated, fully exonerated. We intend to take this to trial. He intends to remain on the ballot. He intends to remain in his seat. Would it benefit, what should we see next? I mean, would it benefit him to try and expedite this or to stretch it out, in your opinion?
Well, that's a very important tactical decision they're going to have to make. If they believe that they can get an acquittal, yes, it's going to help him, but it's also going to interfere with his reelection campaign. And he's really not in as strong a position as Ted Stevens was when Ted Stevens ran for reelection while under indictment. He doesn't have necessarily that same base level of support to say, I don't have to worry about campaigning. I can spend all my time preparing for trial. This is a tremendous undertaking of psychological time and commitment to fight this charge.
So what's the very next step that we should expect to see?
I think probably the next thing you'll see is motions in the case. I think you may also see a superseding indictment, another indictment. That happens in federal cases. That's not unusual. You saw it with the Buffalo Billions case. They didn't go with the first indictment they brought out. Also note that in the indictment, there's many people who weren't indicted who are co-conspirators. Does that mean they're cooperating, or does that mean they're yet to be indicted?
We do not know. Also, there's been a large body of reporting on this because it has been, as I mentioned, over a year that this question regarding insider trading and innate pharmaceuticals and the relationship between the congressman. So we're seeing all of these things kind of get redredged up. Did he tip off colleagues, for example? And so I imagine that that's all going to come out in the wash.
I think it's going to come out, and remember, he's going to have issues even in Congress. Will they force him to come in, make statements? Looking at the indictment, he's already done interviews with the FBI about this, which they say, in which he presented false statements.
Right.
But again, he's in a precarious position running for re-election, trying to answer questions about this, not just in the legal sector, in the public sector. And if you look at this, his public statements put out by his own congressional office are being used against him. And elected officials, you would think, would be more sensitive to that problem because this happens time and time again. Their public statements being used against them.
Well, I thank you so much for calling in and helping us make sense of all of this, and we will keep you on speed dial.
My pleasure.